slowly because people will be joining in the meantime. So good morning, everyone in Europe. And also for you, Brad, over there in Australia, good evening for you.
Yes, hi. Thanks for having me. This is fun.
Yeah, it's a pleasure for us. Welcome to the 3D Organons webinar on Anatomy Meets the Metaverse. We will look at innovative uses of XR for enhanced learning in healthcare. My name is Kristina Siposova, and I'm a sales manager and XR specialist at 3D Organon. And I will be your host today. We have invited a special guest speaker, as you can see, Brad Chesham, founder of Bundle of Rays. He's an amazing person, excellent and passionate professional, and what is the most important thing for us, it's one of the top experts in nursing education and XR globally. So you have the unique opportunity to meet Brad here today. He will share a lots of interesting experiences, use cases, real life actual experiences from firsthand. So you will have the unique opportunity to meet him, talk to him, and at the end we will have a Q&A session where you can ask questions. So please use this opportunity. Brad has many roles, many positions. He's a very busy person, so I'll just mention a few of them. Apart from being an entrepreneur in the field of XR education, he's a critical care nurse, and he is also an Australian clinical entrepreneur, an Ohio State Innovation and Entrepreneurship Fellow. Plus, he has a lot of other activities. I believe he will tell us a bit more about himself soon. And what I wanted to mention before we start, I would like to state that none of our guest speakers and members of the 3D Organon Scientific Advisory Board, which Brad is also a member, they don't receive any financial reward or remuneration of any kind for participating at the webinars and for their collaboration. So Brad, I will give you the space to introduce yourself. Let's jump into the Medverse and into the topic that is of our interest.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks. I'm not sure how to go after being labeled as amazing. For everyone who hasn't met me in the participants list, don't judge me by the end of it, but maybe we can follow up and have a beer or coffee together. But thanks, Kristina. Yeah, so I am a nurse and I work in XR, which is quite exciting, also daunting. I'm not sure, looking at the participants list, I do know a few people, so I am going to stalk all of you that I know in the participants list and get you to provide some engagement and feedback. But working with XR can be challenging because it's new. And the ongoing conversation that we always hear is, what's the evidence? What do we see in the research? And this is where we have a good gap between innovation and best practice. So an ability to fill that gap with actual real world use case. I'm lucky enough to, well, in the last month, for example, we spent 10 days in the US. We've been in Perth in Australia, and I just come back from a very venturing across the globe, looking at actual uses, actual adoption of XR in classroom settings, in academia, or in clinical settings, such as hospitals or care providers.
Sounds amazing. Very busy.
Yeah. I'll just go through a few introductions about my company and myself, and then we can have a chat, Kristina. So
please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Bundle of Rays is a nursing education company. We're an aggregation business whereby we work with a lot of different partners to build nursing education content in XR spaces. But ultimately, we focus on the learning. So we have a heavy focus on learning design within XR environments. And this is the fun part of our conversation today, because if we take something like 3D Organon, if you work in a hospital or you work at a university, you're never going to treat that headset as a library. You're not going to send the student to the headset and say, hey, go to VR and learn something. Now, you can go into the VR and use 3D Organon, but you're always going to set that person up with some learning design around what that learning outcome is going to be. And that's a little bit about what we're going to talk about today, is how to optimize the learning experience of something like 3D Organon, whereby you can deploy anatomy, which is a low-hanging fruit, and 3D Organon is a fantastic software program, but it also requires some thinking on the organization's behalf to set up the learning outcome so that student can be successful. That is what we specialize in. So as Christina said, I'm a nurse myself. Yeah, I've worked in Iraq. I worked in Mosul with the World Health Organization during the ISIS war. I've worked in Afghanistan with the British military in Camp Bastion in 2012. I've worked in Africa. I've also worked in Mexico. I've worked in Norway. I was in England, London for nearly 8 years and have a dual nationality now with a British passport. And I currently sit and live in a place called Noosa, which is in I wouldn't really call it Northern Australia, but it's a northern state on the eastern side of Australia, just above Brisbane. And I still work as a practicing nurse. And this is one of the real points of differentiation with our business, is that we're not a tech company. We're a nursing company. So we work with nurses and we build education for nurses. And I've been nursing for nearly 2 decades across the world. So we have some good systems, a good ecosystem with partners like 3D Organon and other providers, whereby we now have business in the US, the UK, Sri Lanka. We've just signed an MOU agreement with a significant partner in India. We have sales in Australia. So Bundle of Rays and the work we do is into the nursing ecosystem. And very exciting, we're also going into medical curriculum from the middle of this year. So that's probably a reasonable assessment of myself and my company, Bundle of Rays. For those who are listening, can they send through emoticons, Christina, on the chat?
Oh, yes, sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, so if anybody is a participant at the moment, if you send a thumbs up through, just to give an indication of who's currently using virtual reality in their workplace, and if you can give a thumbs down to who currently wants VR, but haven't been able to adopt it for some kind of reason. So we'll see what kind of percentages of people who are using VR, you'll send a thumbs up. And those people that want to use it, but haven't been able to deploy it, you can send a thumbs down, just to give us an indication of who is doing what in the world.
Okay, let's see the thumbs up, all of you, hopefully.
It says the chat is disabled. Thanks, Ben. I met Ben in Germany. I'm sure he's got some good points to deploy.
Oh, is it? Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right, Christina, would you like me to go straight to the video, or did you have any questions you wanted to fire at me first?
No, go straight to the Medverse. I think people would like to see how the 3D Organon Medverse looks like in action. In action. So let's go and jump into it. Yeah,
no worries. I did look at this today. So what I'm about to show you is maybe, I don't know, is it like a 1:30 or 2 minutes video of capture in 3D Organon? So learning about anatomy in a multi-user virtual reality environment. I do move around a little bit, so I'm going to let the video play, but I will pause it at different moments to discuss key areas of what I'm trying to get across here. Hi, Christina.
Hi, Brad. How are you? Nice to see you here in the Medverse.
Yeah, no, I'm doing really good. I've been busy traveling, but I didn't have to travel far to come and see you. Sorry for the cheesy laugh. So just to kick things off, you can see we're in a virtual reality environment. Christina is represented by an avatar. I also have an avatar appearance, and she's on the other side of the world. So if you're a professor of medicine, if you're a cardiologist and you want to train some juniors, you can immediately pop the headset on and have some people standing next to you. Yeah, no, well,
where we are and what is possible here.
Exactly. So we're in 3D Organon at the moment, and I'm just going to change the environment, but I'm in Australia, but we're in this virtual office in the Medverse of 3D Organon. And whereabouts are you sitting this morning?
I'm in Europe. I'm in Slovakia right now.
Slovakia. So you're on the other side of the world, but you're standing next to me.
Yeah, exactly. That sounds really unreal.
I know I'm going to repeat this point, but I think it needs to be underlined how important this ability to enhance collaboration is. I just returned from a trip in remote Australia, which is in the outback. Literally, there's only enough Wi-Fi just to keep the electricity on. That was my joke. But the ability for people in those locations to have access to specialists is extremely low. The particular area I was in was they have a significant amount of rheumatic heart disease, for example. So they have to fly cardiologists in and out to this region. Now, if you could get a cardiologist into a space like this without having to fly, you have their expertise, and then they can look at heart models, look at a mitral valve, talk about mitral valve regurgitation, and they could do some training of staff without having all the peripheral infrastructure. That is ridiculously valuable to all organizations in remote and rural locations.
I can so well when you're next to me, I can see
Yep.
the same thing.
Perfect. And just for demonstration purposes, obviously we're talking about anatomy and nursing education. So we've got a heart here. I'm just going to take the pericardium off, and I'll just change the background back to black so it's easy to see. There we go. But obviously one of the biggest use cases for nurses is, physical assessment. And one thing that nurses do all the time is cardiac assessment. We have telemetry and ECGs, and for our US colleagues, they call them an EKG, which is the electrophysiology of the heart. Do you know any of the cardiac arteries, Christina?
Just going to pause it there before we find out what Christina's baseline cardiology knowledge is. I don't know if you noticed in the background, I moved that menu away from us. I'll come back to that point in a minute. Just rewound it there. So there's a principle called the coherence principle in education from educational learning design. Now you can see when the user is in this environment, there's a model in front of us. Now the coherence principle is related to cognitive load. So if you have somebody in an environment and they're inundated with text and inundated with drop-down menus, it can actually be really hard for that person to understand or take away whatever the learning outcome might be. So this is just some of the nuanced pieces around educational design within these XR environments, is to understand stress. And things like cognitive load or a coherence principle is that you never really want to inundate somebody with too much information, because if you're in a 360 environment and it's completely full with all this collateral information, the end user can actually feel quite lost. So usually when I'm in a teaching scenario, if I'm talking, we're about to talk the left anterior descending artery here and talk about myocardial infarctions, I don't really want any collateral information in my way or in the user's field of vision. So again, it's all about setting the user up for success.
Coronary arteries, that's called the left anterior descending. And I imagine if someone's having a heart attack, this little pain symbol is probably a good way to look at it. But the beautiful thing is, while we're here standing next to each other, we can literally deconstruct this anatomy to see what's happening underneath. So I can literally lean in and have a look at structure of that valve.
I'll just pause it there. So we're looking at the right coronary, the right ventricle here. That's the tricuspid valve. There's the chordae tendineae and the papillary muscles. This is one feature to 3D Organon, which I think is critical for people to understand, is that anatomy is anatomy to a certain degree, but actually anatomy is a very complex thing. And you'll see in the right ventricle where my little pink finger is here, there's a small band there called the moderator band. Now, the moderator band has a function in terms of the conduction system where electricity can help run across the right ventricle to help depolarize the ventricle in a faster way, because the left ventricle has two bundle branch, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of cardiac models in virtual reality omit this moderator band. So the question of clinical accuracy when we start talking about virtual reality anatomy must always be at the forefront. So a lot of anatomical models that we use are actually anatomically incorrect. So if I was to go to Sketchfab and buy a lung, or go to TurboSquid or somewhere like that and buy a brain, those models as a base from a meter away might represent an organ. But actually if I'm trying to train a nurse about the circle of Willis and when they have a stroke and what area of the MCA might be affected, the clinical accuracy of some of these models really needs to be judged. So when we start to use these in medical education or nursing education, fundamentally as educators deploying this content, there has to be a level of clinical governance around how the content is deployed and what that content is actually representing, because we never ever want to send a message that the content itself has errors amongst it, unless we're setting that up within learning design to actually challenge the user. So that's one great thing about 3D Organon, is that it's built by clinical anatomists and the clinical anatomy has accuracy.
And move around the anatomy and in my own way, which is just amazing. And obviously you're on the other side of the planet. So to be able to fluidly move through this really does add a lot to tutorial sessions. And, you know, I can even draw an arrow and point to that mark just to make it clear. But yeah, so as you can see behind you, there's some information that's come up that even though we're on the other side of the world, we can share. I can even go fade others. Now we can see our point with an X-ray view of the anatomy, which is great. And there's also some cadaveric images that we can put up and export next to the real virtual images. So some great features. But I'll also just show up another model. So if we want to have a look at the whole arterial system on its own, we can pull up different models again, completely interactable. And there we go. We can even have them moving, which is pretty great.
Okay, I'll stop it there. So I think, again, understanding the learning design and how these applications can be used in curriculum. You know, I think the word curriculum in a clinical hospital environment is a little bit different than obviously in academia, but setting up the total sum learning experience is essential, because a user can just flick in there and flick around, and it can be entertainment, which is great. But something that we don't want is an arcade experience where some user pops in, has a look around and pops out. Because if we're trying to get somebody from a novice to a master, there needs to be an ability to improve their level of skill and or improve their level of knowledge, which is something obviously at Bundle of Rays we get quite passionate about. I'll just keep flicking through my slides, Christina, and if you have any questions at any time, you can come back. And there's a few people on the Q&A and the chat are saying that they can't send anything through. So in the background, if you're able just to have a look at that.
Yeah. Feel free to then send the questions through the Q&A. The chat is disabled for the webinar, but the Q&A should work for everyone well. So if you have any questions, we're going to address them at the end of the session. Yeah,
got it. Great. Okay, super. So I think the next element comes down to value. You know, I've worked in healthcare education for a good 10 years. As I said, I've worked in academia. I've also worked as a clinical educator. And the question of value, particularly at the moment, post-COVID, people are tired, they're burnt out, budgets are thin. Where is the value in the education that we give? The upfront question to me all the time, because I also run a virtual reality or extended reality learning company, is what's the return of investment of virtual reality? You know, it's expensive. Now, this always gives me a shiver, because I know how expensive healthcare education is. You can spend $40,000 to $150,000 on a mannequin. Now, that mannequin is only ever going to have one purpose, which is simulation. And that mannequin is going to live in a room that has 4 walls and a particular postcode. Now, you can never scale that mannequin at all. So some of this extended reality conversation is really understanding a new mindset around how education gets deployed. And a great analogy that I've been using at the moment is with ChatGPT, you know, the new machine learning language model that's available. Everyone's going banzai about on social media and etc. Is that in Australia in particular, I'm not sure about Europe or the US, but there's this great fear that universities are not going to be able to understand if students are teaching on essays. Now, immediately there's this forced attrition for educators and educational organizations to understand, are our assessments appropriate? You know, there's this immediate point of internal reflection of, oh, are we giving the students the appropriate assessments for these tasks? Because they can just get around that task now using something like ChatGPT. And I think this change in mindset is something that XR is now also presenting to organizations. And there's a real challenge in the industry to educate the industry, because they don't know what they don't know until they put a headset on. And I think that's a really powerful thing about immersive environments, is that people will ask you about the return of investment, but they've spent very little time in an XR environment to understand what it actually is, and how it gets deployed. That's a challenge for the industry to get across value. Nurses, there's 29 million nurses in the world. So educating those nurses takes billions of dollars. It's a huge market. There's a lot of investment, and a lot of the learning that gets undertaken is distributed. So these nurses are scattered about the world, or scattered about a country or a state, or even scattered within a facility. So therefore, something like XR offers great value in an ability to use something like the Medverse in 3D Organon to have people in a centralized campus within virtual reality with this multi-user function, where the actual content adds value. And also I would argue, helps to reduce costs, because these people now have a choice of where they get met with their education, because they could be at home. The kids could be in bed, it could be 8 o'clock at night. It's much more convenient for the end user. The other thing that I love asking at universities, which is a very challenging thing for academia, is what is the future of a lecture and a lecture theatre in a physical university campus? What does that look like? Because I know at the moment, I've been to maybe 10 or 15 universities in the past 3 months, is that students are not turning up to these lectures. So that, there might be 500 students and 300 are invited to a lecture, and they might get 40 people turning up. So it's a 10% lean in to a lecture. So where is the value in that? Again, it's a great internal reflection moment about how do we drive value in education. And the flip side of the coin to that is clinical education within a hospital or a care environment. Is how do we get the nurses off the floor when they're busy people to attend quality education? And engagement is a huge piece of that, providing an incentive. And again, XR environments, something fresh, provides some value, but that sense of awe dries up very quickly. So much like the first time you ever used a PC, now we're using smartphones and they're not more than a meter away from us in a 24-hour period, is that how do you continually drive engagement over time with virtual reality if their sense of awe dips? And that's a challenge. And one of our staff and colleagues, Craig, who is our head of learning at Bundle of Rays, has an absolutely amazing approach towards, is making sure that virtual reality labs or virtual reality immersive training centers, whatever you want to call them, don't gather dust. That conversation should be had at the get-go when you spend the money. How are we going to ensure that these headsets don't get dust on them? Because if you buy a headset, you buy one application, you want to train 500 people across the year, what does that look like in terms of the logistics and the deployment? That just needs a little bit of a plan. It's not difficult. But it just does need a little bit of project planning around how to get the most value out of those headsets. So the point of this slide is value, value, value. Value for the business, value for the end user, and value for the staff, because the staff are the most critical point in that if you make a purchase of, whatever, $50,000, you get some PC VR, you get some headsets, you get some software. The only way that that is going to be magical for the organization is by the way that the teachers wield it. So if the teachers don't have any buy-in, if the teachers don't have any education about how to understand the hardware, then the end learning experience is going to be poor. And therefore, the ultimate business efficiency will be low. So finding value.
Do you have, Brad, any tips how to engage staff a bit more, how to make them feel part of this and to be motivated using new technologies? Any real life tips for us?
Welcome to the next slide, Christina. Welcome to the next slide. Yeah, so this image I made with Midjourney, which is a machine learning application that drives text into images. But what I did is I did it. I was engaged with that experience to put it into the PowerPoint. So if you want staff to be engaged and you want staff to be a part of something, well, then they have to be integral to that thing. So 3D Organon is a great example, because I could pick up my headset and I could say to my students, all right, I want you to go to 3D Organon and I want you to learn about the coronary arteries. Okay, so I go, I put my headset on, and what am I going to learn? What is it that I'm going to do that in 3 or 4 months' time I remember? This is where the business can generate a pre-brief for the virtual reality experience, maybe on a checklist or an assessment that the students have to read, and they have to onboard their learning experience before they go into the headset. And then they go into the headset and maybe they work with a buddy. Maybe there's somebody outside of the headset and they work as a pair. And then, 3D Organon, again, is great because you could do a scavenger hunt, for example. So if you were looking at, I've worked a lot in transplantation, so heart-lung transplants, you have to identify that a patient is brain dead. So having a good understanding of what the cranial nerves are and also how the brainstem works is fundamental during those processes as a senior nurse. So I could work with a buddy, we could put the headset on, and we could go through the nervous system in the brain together. And then at the end of the learning experience, there's a debrief. So this is a very similar sort of methodology to simulation-based training in healthcare with a pre-brief, the intervention, and a debrief. But what happens is the educators become bound to the total experience and they're invested in the total learning. So therefore, they're not just sending their students off to the library, off to the VR headset to do the learning. The teachers are intimately involved in the learning experience, and that means they must be engaged in that experience. The other probably tip or piece of advice is that you're always going to have trailblazers, and you're always going to have people that want to say no in the team. So with virtual reality and any innovation or change management, these people that say no, okay, I get it. You carry on, you just keep doing what you're doing. But the people that are the trailblazers, and even the people that kind of say, nah, yeah, maybe, they're the people that you want to grab, tap them on the shoulder and incentivize them to go forward with the program. And what we see is that those people drive the change. They're the leaders, right? And then the students or the learners become incentivized. And the people at the back that said no, they kind of dragged along by everybody else because everybody else likes it, everybody else has deployed it, and then you have a team approach. Now, the hardest thing you're ever going to do is manage people, but we see that approach has been successful for us. So, find my wine. That's a lot of talking. If anybody else has any tips on that, feel free to flick them through to the Q&A. One thing I do hate about Zoom, I love Christina, I love 3D Organon, but it's a very passive experience. So as I talk, feel free on the Q&A to disagree with me, tell me that I'm wrong, or agree with me and tell me that I'm right to generate any tangent discussion. But I'll keep going. So on that point, how do you engage staff? How do you have buy-in is the vision. Every organization needs a vision about what it is they're trying to achieve. Now, an executive who pays the bills, the vision is do better, do faster, do more. That's, as an executive, you really want to save money, have a better business efficiency, etc. But, because I'm a nurse, I want to help Jenny. Now, Jenny doesn't really exist. Jenny is a persona. Jenny is a nurse. Maybe she's been nursing for about 3 or 4 years. She's really motivated. She really cares about her patients, and she works on a roster. She does night shifts. She does weekends. And if Jenny's working on the respiratory ward and it's 10 o'clock at night and one of her patients deteriorates and gets sick, how do we make Jenny better? How can we provide the training to give Jenny confidence, to give her the knowledge and to give her the skills to help her patients, to make her confident, and then therefore make the business more efficient? Now, Jenny is my vision. I want to work with Jenny. That's what we want to do as an organization using these technologies, is to make Jenny better. And I hope that organizations and educators also have a vision, because otherwise they're walking in the forest in the middle of the night and the sun is coming up in a long time. Using VR, just to use VR, is going to get you nowhere. You're going to spend money, they will gather dust, and then the total experience will be lost. and then future buy-in will be even harder. So digesting, what time are we at, Christina?
Let me check. Yes, we have 5 minutes left. Then we can
Okay.
go to Q&A. So yeah.
Yeah, perfect. All right. So I think one of the key outputs from any decision to work with applications like 3D Organon or virtual reality education generally in metaverse environments is it's personalized. You know, you and me jumped in that Medverse, we're standing next to each other. That's very powerful. And you feel engaged. You have an immediate sense of embodiment and a sense of presence. Now, in the research, those are two of the fundamental features that L&D within XR is really prominent. So, you know, having those features, you know, I can only see as being essential going forward. So, you know, if you and me can work on a model, if we can, you know, have an ultrasound capability and have all these other features, that provides a personalized experience whereby the learning outcomes can suit me, not suit the team, not suit the business, not suit the patients, but suit the person that needs to do the learning. That's really essential. That is a non-linear process to go from novice to master for a person as an individual, you know, whether it's a textbook, video, or VR. You're going to spend time dipping between these different types of multimedia, but the VR allows this active learning whereby you have that sense of presence, which is very powerful. And the last point there is we should let the technology do the rest. So again, 3D Organon, we go into an environment and we set the learner up to succeed. So we give them some learning outcomes, but then it's up to them. Right? The application is there, the models are there, all the features are there. Then we just need to let the user go ahead and do it. That's active learning. And they can do that at their own pace whenever they like to do it. And this is a huge feature to some applications that's missing, is this ability to go about the active learning process in such a fundamental way. And of course, in the future, a lot of applications are going to start to measure things like biometrics and machine learning on the back of that. I know that 3D Organon have the quizzes, and I'm sure in the future there's going to be different data entry points in the application, but that is a really interesting feature to virtual reality in healthcare. So just quickly finishing up, I don't know if anybody's seen the documentary on Netflix, The Flat Earthers. It is hilarious. And obviously me and Christina are on the other side of the world, but that doesn't mean we're in a flat earth. She's here and I'm down here at the bottom of the crater. Is what is your current reality? I think, what is good education? You could ask me, you could ask, you know, Tom, you could ask Jenny on the respiratory ward. We're all going to have a different answer because it all, to some degree, is a personalized experience. And this question doesn't get asked to the end user often enough, or the UX doesn't get put forward enough to allow that feature. And that's something within 3D Organon that is great, because all the models and the user capability can be turned off and turned down, like I mentioned before about the coherence principle and cognitive load. If you want to reduce everything and have a very simple black environment with the model, you can. If you want to then expand that teaching moment and open something up, you can, but you have these choices. It's not just thrust upon you. So what does it mean to you? The question is, what is a good nurse? You know, what are you trying to achieve, or what is a good doctor? It's a very complex thing, and how you get from A to B is the challenge that we're trying to work towards. So within our business and also within 3D Organon, you're understanding the possibility of success with XR education. So making it accessible, it goes across different mediums, making it customizable. So you have the application, you set the design up. This collaborative feature with the Medverse, it's available 24/7, etc. To us, this is the really take-home pieces that make the experience warming and enjoyable. In nursing, you know, there's simulation as well, where you can assess a patient, you can do all different kinds of things, but redefining competency is what we see something that 3D Organon is working towards. So how does a nurse learn about physiology and anatomy at the moment it's in a textbook, but we need to redefine how we understand that, because going off to a library and reading a textbook, some people can enjoy. I appreciate that. But collectively as a society and as a group, you usually find that very challenging and very time consuming. So, from all the research we're seeing at the moment is that XR can help enhance this capability to redefine what we see as competency. Whew, come up for some air. How was that?
Amazing, Brett. Thank you. That was amazing. Thank you for your insights, for sharing your experience. Maybe just last question that we have not addressed is, what does the future hold for XR education? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a question that comes up all the time. I think every business is going to have a huge ability to be agile around machine learning. There is no question about that. I think what 3D Organon have done with their Medverse capability is fundamentally going to be the future baseline requirement, whereby you can collaborate with people.
Yep.
One of the biggest discussions around 3D Organon is developing pathophysiology and having disease states to be visible. And I'm pretty sure there's going to be some news coming up soon around how 3D Organon can change the game by having pathophysiology in relation to general anatomy. So that's going to be an exciting feature, because there's something like an aortic dissection. It's great to look at the aorta, but fundamentally as a clinician, how do I treat the disease state? Being able to see that within an environment like 3D Organon is going to be very powerful.
That's true. It comes with the future projects.
That's right. Comes with the future projects. So ears to the ground. And I think the other thing is learning design. I banged on about that a lot, but at the moment, I think it's a little bit cowboy. I think people are deploying headsets. I think people are sending out content without thinking about the end-to-end picture of making Jenny better over time. That's the other thing, is that we can't make Jenny better on Thursday. We've got to train her in January, in March, and July, and December. And in December, we need to measure it. So having an ability to work with Jenny over time is the real key. But that means we need to think about the learning design of these applications and how they're deployed in the business.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you, Brett. Thank you very much. We have actually really nice comment from Laurette Botha. Thank you. She's mentioning that it will be great to have tailor-made learning for each Jenny. And this is the first learning design that may be able to address each person's individual learning needs. Very exciting. Yeah, Laurette, that's right. That's something that is going to come in the future.
So just that as an example, if you had 10 students sitting in a room, maybe they have a computer between one or two of them, you could ask them to go onto ChatGPT and they could create their own quiz that's suitable for them. And then they could go into 3D Organon. So they're bound to that learning experience, right? So, already this ability to have personalized learning, ChatGPT can create a quiz in about 30 seconds. So as long as the teacher can have oversight of these quizzes, something like 3D Organon is stocked, ready to rock and roll. So these students can simply set up their quizzes that are suitable for them. The teacher can have oversight. They go away, they do the learning in something like 3D Organon as the interaction, and then they can have a debrief at the end of it. So it is exciting because the level of content creation and the ability for the user to contribute to that learning experience is the challenge, but also it is the excitement of what is quality in the future.
Thank you, Brett. I would like to invite all the attendees to ask questions now, so we can use the opportunity that we are with Brett, and feel free to ask through the Q&A chat, please, and we will address all of them. We have some comments from Benjamin. I couldn't agree more on that, Bradley. We really have to define learning through XR and their design. So we have a few nice comments here.
I'm glad Ben and me have been able to connect on this webinar, because we've been trying to connect in other means for months now. So it's nice to see you, Ben. We definitely need to catch up.
Yeah, we have a anonymous from anonymous attendee. Based on your experience, Brad, does student performance improve with 3D Organon?
Okay, this is a really good question because I would also, before we start talking about XR education, let's start talking about the status quo of how do students perform right now, and if we're talking about 3D Organon, in anatomical education. So most of the medical schools that I go to that teach anatomy have anatomage tables. These tables are $200,000. So I understand that there's this fundamental question of do they improve with VR? But before we get to that, let's wrap that up in some context of what the status quo is and how they improve today. They improve today with cadaveric material and very expensive devices. We're measuring it is the answer. So I know for a fact there's multiple research studies going on around, and there's other anatomical VR applications out there, but 3D Organon definitely is leading the way in features and capability. So I don't need to answer that question. We can look at the evidence as it comes out in the next 12 months, and I'm sure there's already papers that have come out.
Yes.
But I would counter that to make sure that it's not a white paper, because a white paper can be very good quality, but ultimately it is marketing. We do need very good quality research that has external validity. So that means good research methodology around the learning.
Yes.
Does student performance, sorry, Kristen, I'll just finish on that. Does student performance improve with 3D Organon? What I have seen is that nurses want to learn about anatomy and they can access it. Now, if you're a nurse in an emergency department and you want to learn about a stroke, where do you go to access your anatomical education? You do it at home and you do it online. So 3D Organon allows this increased ability to have some access to quality immersive content. So my answer would be yes.
Interesting. Thank you. Yeah, there are a lot of studies where research papers done by institutions using actively 3D Organon, and they have very objective results. So feel free to reach out to us at prosupport at 3dorganon.com or through our website, and we will be happy to share the studies with you. There are plenty of papers you can go through with interesting information. You can also see the approach of other institutions, how they made the study, what type of criteria and analytics, etc. they used. So it's gonna be useful for you, definitely. We have a lot of questions coming in. That's good. There is one question here. Would you recommend 3D Organon for patient education, Brad?
Okay, so my recent example, I think I even seen, I won't call her out by name. She was on here initially. There was a lady on the program. I think she's just dropped off like a minute ago. One of the nurses who was up in Northern Australia. So I was in a place called Mornington Island. If you've got 5 minutes, you can Google it. It's a tiny island in the Gulf of Australia. It's in the middle of nowhere. Their download speed there is like 2 megabits per second. They have very poor infrastructure. But 3D Organon works on the headset without Wi-Fi. And
that's true.
They suffer, the First Nations community there suffers from rheumatic heart disease. Now, we literally use the headset to show some children what a mitral valve looks like and how the heart beats and the valve works while the heart is beating. So can 3D Organon be used for patient education? Absolutely. The only thing you would not want to do is overwhelm them with clinical knowledge, because it is quite clinical. So again, you would set them up to succeed. You'd have the model ready. You'd give them a bit of an explanation. Then you could pop the headset on for maybe a minute or two. I would suggest casting the headset so you can see what they see, and then you could talk them through a fundamental piece of anatomy. But if you were talking to a patient and they have a disease state, if they have a mass or some kind of functional problem, they're not going to see that in 3D Organon, but you can show them the normal anatomy and guide them through that process. And I think it's a massive value add for patients. I think they would love it.
Yeah, thank you, Brad. On top of that, we have some pathology like simulation tools where you can actually draw or simulate the pathology in a way so that the patient can understand better. So even though there is no real pathology images or models right now, so with the tools like drawing tool, you can paint in 3D. We have a tumor growth tool, the bony spurs, we have pain effects, we have several tools that you can use, and you can actually draw and paint it. So this is really helpful. How you can indicate the affected structures, or how you can indicate or show how the surgical procedure is going to look like, etc. So there are plenty of opportunities and options in the application. Not only not just looking or at the 3D models, but you can actually manipulate, and you can use those instructional or simulation tools to enhance the understanding. So this is really, really helpful too. We have a lot of questions here. I'll maybe just go one. Was one interesting here. Let me check. So somebody was asking. Okay, lab setup. So there is another one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you give us an example of the perfect VR lab setup? Is it easy to create one? That's a difficult question, but you may maybe give a
let me
overview.
Just give me a moment.
Mm-hmm.
See if I can pull this off. I'm going to do some very bad drawing here, so get ready for this. I don't have a pen. One moment. It's going to go to paint. Okay, so a VR lab. You know, I still don't love the word lab either. I'm not sure. It's a teaching room, classroom, utilizing virtual reality. You know, there'll be a screen at the front of the room with the teacher, and the teacher is going to facilitate the learning session. We can't escape modern architecture, so there's probably going to be a couple of tables here with a chair, and these people could be doing traditional teaching methods.
Brad, sorry to interrupt. We can see just your presentation. Maybe yeah.
Yeah, I'll share again.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, is that my paint screen?
Now we can see it. If you can maybe just give a brief
Perfect.
summary.
Yeah. This is the teacher here and the front of the classroom. And most classrooms now have a digital display, maybe a screen here with a HDMI. So you could be casting at the front of the room for people to see the experience. Then we have some traditional tables. Again, I said this is poor art, but this is the status quo. So if I put status quo here, so they might be spending 15 or 20 minutes working on a particular project that the teacher has given them. And then you're going to have a VR headset, a VR headset, a VR headset, a VR headset. And, you know, this is sort of maybe like a 2 meter square area that's open. And this person that's in the VR headset, they would have a buddy, you know, working with them that doesn't have a headset on, that has maybe a checklist or some kind of learning outcome. And then this person is, you know, running safety, make sure this person doesn't run into the wall or break their leg, or, you know, and they can keep them safe. So you improve your safety across the room. Now, what you've also done as the teacher is you've been able to facilitate the learning for 8 people. So they should be able to work in pairs for a good 15 or 20 minutes around the content that you've set up in the lesson plan. And then you can all swap. So then you can all go from the traditional teaching methods. And then as a teacher over the semester, you can measure, are the students really loving the VR? What is good, what is bad versus the status quo? It's all happening in the one classroom. As long as you have the lesson plan set up, it should run very smoothly. You're only using 4 headsets, so it's not overwhelming to set up 10 headsets and 10 guardians all at once. And of course, if you want to continually add some multi-dimension to the classroom, is you could have some computers and they could be working on the same VR environment that the VR users are working on. So you've got a true multimodal teaching environment within the classroom, and they're all working to the same learning outcome. So that would be my off the bat suggested VR lab. You know, there's a lot of variables around how many students and how long the class is, etc. But for me, that's a low-hanging fruit of having a buddy system versus a status quo where you can swap every 15 minutes as a workshop.
Very, very, very interesting way of setting up the lab, and very beneficial, looks like. Also, what we always do, we always try to understand your particular needs and requirements and resources. So we always communicate with every professor involved in using the technology, and we try to understand what you actually need, how you would like to, or how you envision, how you want to use the software in your teaching. And then we try to adapt, and we try to customize a solution and the setup of the hardware, software, etc. for you. So there is always a communication, and it's as Brad said, there are so many variables and so many ways of setting up the space depending on many different criteria. So feel free to contact us, Brad and 3D Organon. All of us will be happy to assist you with the lab setup as well. I think we have a lot of questions, but we are a little bit running out of time. So I'll just ask one that I liked from Rory Tanner. Thank you, Rory, for asking, what has been successful in helping larger organizations such as hospitals already struggling with the technology to begin to see the benefit and value of VR education?
This is a great question, because change management affects everything. So XR is new. So just having the mindset and the capability to get past day-to-day operations, some hospitals just don't have the capacity to do that. They don't have the funding. So depending on your organization, you know, if you look globally across healthcare since COVID started, and even post-COVID, healthcare has continued to struggle. The nursing workforce has lost thousands of staff. Hospitals are under budget. So being able to have the capacity and or capability, plus having the mindset to drive innovation, is a myriad of variables that provides a lot of challenges to big organizations. But that said, within change management, there's always these trailblazers, these change management leaders in the industry. And that's where the space is really flourishing, because on the innovation curve, these leaders are getting the measurements done, they're deploying the innovations, and they're helping build a community of practice of change and demonstrating what the disadvantages are, you know, how to manage cyber sickness, all these kind of things to then overcome the barriers for smooth adoption for the followers to come in behind them. So I think unless your organization has those variables, has an innovation mindset for change, it's going to be tricky until validation truly comes. Because remember, we're just at the beginning of this. This is not even, the word mature is something we'll be saying in 2027. This is, you know, I know 3D Organon have been around for 5, 6 years, maybe even more, 7 years now, but that's very unique in the virtual reality market. So they have been able to grow and mature their content, but a lot of these applications have only been around for 2 years and only been in market for a year. So we're at, I wouldn't call it pioneer, because, you know, this research has been going on for 40 or 50 years around VR environments. But in healthcare, in terms of adoption, we are at the beginning of a long walk, and we have to take that walk together. So follow the trailblazers, be a good follower, and have a good business case would be my suggestions.
Amazing. I think that was a good summary of what we have discussed during the whole webinar. So thank you, Brad, very much again for sharing your experience, useful tips and insights on XR education. If you have any more questions left, feel free to contact us, as I said before, via our website. We will be happy to bridge you with Brad directly, or answer your questions after the webinar through emails, etc. We will stay in touch with all of you. We are happy that you were able to attend today's webinar. We're going to have a next webinar in April again, by the beginning of April. So every month we have interesting and very professional guest speakers invited to our webinar series. So please join us, follow us in the next few months as well. We will stay in touch, all of us. Brad, if you want to give a few words to conclude the webinar, go ahead,
Yeah,
please.
I was just going to say I generally don't like social media, but I am quite active on LinkedIn. So if anybody wants to connect with me, it's my name, Bradley Chesham, or if you type in XR Nursing, you'll be able to find me on LinkedIn. The other thing that you can do is just head over to bundleofrays.com. If I can spell my own company correctly, that would be really helpful. It's probably that glass of wine that's kicking in now. There we go, bundleofrays.com. And we have a contact us page, so you can follow us and have a look at what we're doing. Otherwise, you could contact Christina at 3D Organon and find me that way. But I appreciate you having me. If anybody's got any follow-up questions, feel free to contact either Christina or myself. And it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, the same. Thank you very much, Brad. Thank you for attending the webinar, and see you next time. Have a nice day.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you. Bye, Brad. Take care. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.